Hey friends, John here on the JRB Tree Climbing channel. Today I'm going to do a detailed explanation of how I create and rig a floating anchor. See the prior video on false crotch and floating anchor. Here are the parts of it. This is the floating anchor itself. I typically fashion this with paracord or utility cord. But it's not actually, even though it bears load when rigged, it's not an essential piece of the system. So it could give way. So I do recommend using a relatively strong utility cord, but again, I will actually use paracord because it stretches and therefore places load on the anchor itself. But today I'll be demonstrating with this high visibility utility cord. This is what we call a double girth hitch. Here I have a hunter's bend, and here I have a rappel ring. Other implements can be used. And here I have the Maverick hitch, which has been run up into place, but later can be exploded, and the rope retrieved, leaving a paracord preset in place. Okay, so starting at the base of the tree, we want to practice this move at the base of the tree. You never want to climb and rig your first floating anchor. Get the logistics of it worked out with your feet on the ground. I've got a piece of cord here, and I need to cut the right length. Well, what length should I assume? Well, I'll grab a bite of it, I'll go around the tree, I'll touch the other side, and I'll pull one end. So I've got one end there in my hands. And here, with my other side, I'm just going to take about a wingspan, 5 or 6 feet of additional cord. The tree is always going to be a smaller diameter up in the canopy, and so we know we're going to have enough cord for the operation. Okay, now, first thing I'll do is I'll take the two ends and I'll just leave them slightly offset, and there's a reason for that. I'll pass it around the tree, and then with my right hand, I'm going to form a girth hitch. I'm going quick here. You know how to tie these things because there's prior videos on all of them. I got a girth hitch here in my left hand, and I will pass the two strands through the girth hitch. That becomes a double girth hitch, or a double ring knot, or a double tag knot, according to Ashley. And I'll cinch that against the tree at whatever location I desire. Now, the actual point of the anchor will be at least 16 inches lower than that. So I'll put that just a little bit higher to keep you in view. And cinch that to the tree. Here is going to be the location of my anchor. Now, what can we use for the anchor? There's multiple possibilities. You can use a large carabiner. Here's an old screw gate carabiner that I don't use much for climbing, and even if it was of questionable integrity, it's fine for an anchor because it's just creating a point at which the anchor in the form of the Maverick hitch will bind to the tree. So I could use that. Here's an old carabiner from a hunter safety system, which I'm not too fond of. It's really heavy, and but it's got an adequately wide opening, as wide as a rappel ring. I could use that. But here's my favorite option. This is a rappel ring. You can find opportunities for purchasing these on my website, jrbtreeclimbing.com. I just prefer to use the rappel ring. So I'm going to put that in place using a hunter's bend. So see my prior video on the hunter's bend. These are tools that are already in our toolbox. The hunter's bend is simply the marriage of two overhand knots. So I'm going to choose a height. So again, I'm going with about 16 to 18 inches. More is better than less in the sense that it will be easier to rig. I realize you can't follow me tying this hunter's bend in detail, but that's what the prior video was for. So that's a pretty good location. And see, I've got these tails here, which they can be trimmed off once we get this exactly where we want it. Great. So I've got up in the tree by whatever means is safe for the first time. I could be on an SRT climb, I could be at a higher crotch, I could be on sticks, I could be in any number of situations. So I've got that. We've got to recognize this will be our point of anchor. So we've got to get a little higher when we rig it the first time. We then put a piece of paracord through it. And that constitutes our paracord preset. We go to the bottom of the tree and we would secure it as per my prior video on throw ball basics and paracord presets. And then when it's time to arrive at the tree and get yourself rigged up, I'm going to come down to the other end of the paracord. I'm at the base of the tree. I've got my rope, climbing rope, and on the end of it is one of my JRB end loops. This is version 2 of the end loop. I need to secure these. Yes, you could use some sort of metal, you could use a boat clip, but I'm just going to do it old school, no metal on metal. I'm going to tie a running highwayman's hitch. And so see my prior video on the running highwayman's hitch. Very similar to the Maverick, just a little easier to tie. And I don't even lock that. Look, I kind of leave that loose, draw it tight, and that's fine. That's fine. Now, when we're pulling the rope up, if we're pulling straight down and we're right under the tree, it's going to be harder. There's just much more friction. We want this ring to float. We want it to float away. And so we walk away from the tree. And as I walk away, you can see the angle I'm forming here. It gives the rope some room to operate. At this point, I usually give it a nice little tug to get that flip through. It goes around the tree. And this is a pretty rough barked oak tree. I pull that to me. I pull it all the way until it's back to me down at the ground. Now I'm simulating. Then I would walk to the tree, I would adjust my slack, and now I tie my Maverick hitch. I'm going to go ahead and remove my rigging line for now to keep things nice and clean. And now I tie the Maverick hitch. See my prior video on tying the Maverick hitch. Great. And then I'd lock that with carabiner and run it up into place. And again, when running it up into place, we also want to walk away from the tree because we'll get better performance. And when I get close to the tree, as close as possible, I then can ratchet it close to the tree by walking the opposite direction. So it rigged up the left side and I tied my hitch on the right. So I'm going to walk towards the left side. Might need to plan that in terms of the geometry at your climb location. And now it's ready to climb. After I climb, and the last thing I do before rappel is remove my lock. I rappel off of this line. I affix my retrieval line here. Once I'm safely on the ground, I pull, and a retrieval line has got to be, you know, something significant that you can get a good grip on, because especially with stiff ropes, this is a little bit of a pull. And it works better again when you walk away from the tree. Explode that. And I would have, you know, put my paracord back on here and pull that back up into place. Okay, now let's do it again here in the lab. Now, as an alternative, if we don't want to risk dropping anything, we can get started on the ground. After we've cut our cord, we can take our rappel ring and we can put it on the cord, and we can temporarily fashion a hunter's bend here on the ground. Because, you know, I've got some long tails here. I know I've got way too much cord here because we're going to be... So I just loosely tie a hunter's bend. And then affix this into the tree. I'll put the ring near the hunter's bend, but not on it. Again, this would be a much closer operation. Now, you know, you put this any place on the tree that you desire. Just because of my studio situation, it normally wouldn't be in a crotch. I'm going to use this crotch here just to assist me in the filming, but it would normally be tied around the trunk. But I'm going to tie my running girth hitch here. So create a girth hitch with the end of that loop, and I can pass the whole thing through. And this running girth hitch will really cinch into place wherever you want it on the tree. I'm realizing I'm at the top of your field of view. And it'll really cinch on there. And now all we have to do is shorten our hunter's bend. So I'll go ahead and do that for you. Okay, so I've just shortened that hunter's bend. And again, the longer this loop, the better it's going to perform. But once we get that in place, we are ready to rig our paracord preset. Let's move you down just a little bit. paracord preset goes here. So again, you got up in the tree however it was safe to do so the very first time and do this. Now, when you rig your rope, I'm right-handed, and so although you've heard me say about my doubled rope climbing, I've got a convention of going up with the right side and down with the left. I find that with the floating anchor, I prefer to go up the left side and tie my hitch with the right. So, and let's show you how to tie the running highwayman's hitch. See my prior video or videos on the running highwayman's hitch. But here's my JRB end loop version 2. I simply pass, and I could do this with gloves, I simply pass the assembly through, and then I've got about 16 inches with my right on your left, and I'll form the running highwayman's this way. It's simply, I cross over the standing end with a bite, I go around it, and then I go around the back and through it. And I realize this can be locked, but in these rigging scenarios, I just leave a bite about that long. It's never come undone. Sure, Murphy's Law might strike at some point, but I'll just cinch that tight like that. And that's never come undone. But you know, if I cared to, I could simply lock it by putting this through and drawing that a little tight. I just don't see the reason. I've never lost one, so I'm going to continue to take my chances. So that's how I rig my rope. Again, you have other options. And then rig it into the tree this way. Again, I have walked away from the tree to give myself good geometry there. And it's going to be easier on a small diameter tree than a large diameter tree. And in fact, the distance of this length here is proportional, you know, the ideal distance is proportional to the tree diameter. I could have got away with a much shorter span here on such a small tree, and a large tree I might need a larger one. The whole key to getting it rigged is walking away from the tree, and we need enough rope to do that, right? If I'm rigging into a floating anchor at 25 feet, well, I only need about 50 feet of rope if I'm straight down. But if I'm walking away from the tree, well, I need a little bit more to get that rigged. So always, you know, err on the side of having a few more feet of rope. So there, it's up into the tree, and now I will tie the Maverick hitch. Again, this is a refresher. You're aware of these tools I've put in your toolbox. See my prior video on tying the Maverick hitch, which I prefer over the running JRB hitch for this. Put that through, and I can lock it in a number of fashions. You saw me lock it with the carabiner outside. Here I will lock it with the soft toggle using the end of the rope. All those options are depicted on the detailed video. And then run that up into the tree, cinch it tight, walk to the left to bind it. If I walk back to the right, I'll usually rotate and then get enough, just so I can get it where I want in the tree. And then I climb on it. Last thing I do before I rappel is unlock it and attach my retrieval line. Once safely at the ground, release it, and you know, if it's removed, you would reattach it. If you're using your paracord preset as your retrieval line, that's fine, but you obviously can't just pull it through without losing it in the tree. So I've got a running highwayman's there, back through. Okay, now I realize I went pretty quick on all of this stuff, but you know, some folks have been telling me, oh John, your videos are too long. Okay, well this one is pretty brief, even though I introduced everything twice. But it is your responsibility to know how to tie these knots. That's why I have been adding them to your toolbox. I just showed you the Maverick hitch, the running highwayman's hitch, the hunter's bend, and the double girth hitch. These are tools in our toolbox, and this is how we can whip them out and use them effectively. This implement can stay in the tree for some amount of time. This accessory cord is rated at over 1,000 pounds, even it's so small. Now again, if this were to collapse, if once I've got this rigged as a floating anchor, because it is cinched to the tree. If, as I demonstrated in the prior video, if this thing completely went away, it might only budge an inch or so. We're not dependent on this portion for life safety. And so you may see me using paracord for this, and folks are going to say, John, that's not safe. Well, again, we all take our chances, but I don't consider that to be taking a chance at all. That 550 paracord, 1,000 pounds total, even stretches a bit, such that the load is most of the load is actually being absorbed by the anchor itself here. Okay, guys, I can't wait to show you some of the possibilities for this.